Okay, so what is the use of phonology? Like one of the significance of phonology is the fact that sounds change. Like we have separate sounds when we learn the sounds of whatever language we say. We have a number of sounds like 10 words for any consonant and like language X, but then when those sounds are put together as word or in sentences, put together as words or in sentences, or even when words are put together, there are spaces between the words. When we typing gives spaces, but when we speak there are no spaces because language is continuous, and we don't really stop between every two words we say continuously. So the fact that we speak continuously, we stop between the words affects that the way the words are connected to each other, so that the way words come into contact with each other can result in a sound change, usually in the last sound of the first word and the first sound of the next word. But that's not the only thing that happens. Usually changes happen in words, and then for whatever reason changes happen in the words, because in each word you usually have more than one sound, then the words come into contact again, which will produce more changes sound. And also when we talk continuously, we can also talk at different speeds. And uh, then naturally there is intonation, there are ups and downs, and the loudness and frequency of the words can be compared with each other in a sentences or praise, so that there is intonation, which is the rise and fall of the voice at not just the level of the voice I say. And word level affects the quality of the sound, and this can cause the sound to change. Another important thing is that when sound change, they can create variations in the language variations. What is sound changes can produce linguistic variations, which means in the same language, at the same time, there are different forms of the same word. There are different ways of saying things that people like living at the same time. Uh, living at the same time do, or historically can result in changes in the language, meaning these sounds persist. There are variations that appear in the language, and some variants can disappear and be replaced by other variants. The reason I provide an introduction this is to make it relevant to real life, the way we have variations and changes that occur through certain processes. Um, and the one type of assimilation. Okay, so the regression assimilation can also be called anticipatory assimilation, and they say that all these Z nasalizations are contiguous partial regressive assimilation. And the reason is because it's like it's not intuitive for some people, is because they think we have a vowel that becomes similar to the following consonant, so this to be more similar to this, so it should be progressive, but it's not. It's not what becomes something, but what influences what's the that the following sound influences the previous sounds. So the direction of influence is regressive backwards. So that's why it's called regressive. Once you look at it this way, then you will know, you remember. I said assimilation can happen within a word, or it can happen between two words. The place of articulation shifts, which becomes tempest. Now the question is, what happens here? What kind of simulation? Is it partial or total? So of course it's partial. It will be total if it is 10. If not, goes bad. If it becomes step boys, it will be total bad, but it didn't become a step. The boys become 10 boys. So it is a partial floral assimilation, and it is contiguous because it is between two adjacent sounds, and it is regressive, but it affects the previous sound. So the direction of influence is backwards, hence the partial progressive assimilation is contiguous now. What is regressive assimilation? What about progressive assimilation? But I will make it more interesting. I will give an example from Persian. In Persian, to word, the word to deal with is they will say it is there, but the same Persian speakers, when they speak quickly, they do something that interesting. They pronounce. You that it is, let's say you have a certain accessory, so what happens here? Of course, we know that it is total assimilation, right? And why is it total? Because one sound becomes total, the other one is adjacent, because that means between two sounds, but is it aggressively progressive? And how sounds that are not next to each other can affect each other. So, some more evidence. The Persian word for tau is gava, and it sounds like a cognate to English because Persian is in Europe, so the sound is gov and everyone says god. But there are variants of this which some people like it is a dialect or maybe say sociolect or a variation. So the way I can explain this is if you look at the Sigia voice filler plosive voiced labiodental fricative, but voiced dental fricative becomes voiced bilabial plosive. So the fricative sound becomes a plosive sound, which is similar to go. In this case, the fricative L sound become a closer like, so it's a plosiveness of girl that flows forward into the V. So it's an assimilation because the two become similar in terms of being closed. And you might say, what about total non-contiguous progressive assimilation? Is there any evidence for that? And in Sanskrit, there is an assimilation of sibilants. So this happens in Sanskrit. What happens is two different siblings as the beginning of a syllable that works out, meaning when you have two syllables that follow each other, and both have a sibilant in the beginning of the cervic sound becomes, yes, I'm not sure I can pronounce it correctly, alveolo-palatal fricative. And for the Italian, you'll notice that the changes are very systematic, and while the differences between Italian and Spanish and Portuguese and French and Romanian, other Romance languages, the way these sounds change depends on how they change the accumulation of all those changes into a language. But now we see some examples of the way Latin changed into the Italian word octo, which means 8, and here I'm not transcribing phonetically and I'm sticking to the regular orthography that the parent sounds cuts. The C sounds cuts octo to otto in Italian. So that kind of assimilation, what is meant by recursive, because the next sound affects the previous sound. It is total contiguous recursive assimilation of a particular class of sounds, and this would be a particular class of sounds. Usually the process is applied universally through the language to all words or almost any word, and that's how the language completely changes. So once again, let's open the discussion about the phonological process, which is the process in which sounds change, so that the changes can be various types of one type of change in sounds becoming more similar to each other is called assimilation. It can be that two sounds become less similar to each other, which is known as dissimilation, but there are situations where the sound is completely removed, which is called dilation or elation. But interestingly, we have cases where a sound is inserted, which is called an insertion, or more technically, an appendix. So these are two different names for the same process, different names for the, they don't mean different things. So what is meant by insertion is the process in which one or more sounds, so more than one, can be inserted into a word or between words. As you remember, in dilation we have sounds that become nothing, although insertion is the opposite of dilation because it is a case where nothing becomes something. For the example is, we know that in words like card in English, so it is pronounced card, but in British English it becomes called, R is removed. In British English, then you have some words like car, but in British English it is quiet, but R has potential there. So for it is clear because this is American English, so in British English it should be legal. And you will hear, and there is here that no art here. Even in American English there is no art. This is called instructive art. Um, so the word often undergoes swing insertion and becomes frequent, and then often you see for voiceless. This is voiced. This because the vowel is voiced, so this voiced becomes assimilated. Okay, so this a diachronic example of the English word school has been borrowed into sequence and becomes school. So what happens here? You see that it has been inserted, and the next example will be a diachronic example from Spanish. And for the third phonological process we will discuss is deletion, which can also be referred to as language ellipsis. There are basically two different names for the same process. So in assimilation, we have two sounds becoming more similar to each other than they were to the original in this simulation. We have two sounds becoming less similar. We have a sound being deleted like the name. So if I want to show it in technical notation, we have a sound that becomes meaningless. That's what is meant by deletion. If something becomes nothing, so how does that make sense? Like, give me an example. Like, we already have the English word handbag that we discussed in assimilation, but we have a handbag becomes a erased into nothing, just disappeared into nothing. The hand turns back into a handbag. Of course, we also hide it into a handbag. But that is the process of assimilation. But it is not relevant here. So my point is that we can say that sometimes a word undergoes more than one neurological process because you have naba, and as you know in the chart, na is alveolar and it is bilabial. What happens is we change it to change the place of articulation from the alveolar ridge to the labial position to the alveolar lip ridge, because this is also a process of assimilation, and this is of course too much assimilation, aggressive contagious progression. In the Cockney English that we have is of course different from English of standard English or standard American English in certain ways. One of the differences is in that it's called age dropping. So basically what they're doing, they're systematically dropping ages. For example, the word happy, they'll say happy and pretty, happy and pretty, active. So age dropping is the systematic removal of age in English words in Cockney accent. In standard English and standard American English, is called RP or RP as they say, which is the accepted pronunciation as in RP. And now we will talk about the dissimulation. Assimilation becomes more similar. Dissimulation is less common than assimilation in the worst languages. So that means if a sound is going to undergo changes through phonological processes, it is more likely to be assimilation than simulation. So it's intuitive to think that when two sounds appear next to each other adjunctively or close to each other, but not necessarily next to each other, they will be more similar. Why dissimulation? Why it sounds become less similar to each other? Okay, so there's a different, right? So why it sounds become less similar to each other? Because when you string sounds together linearly and when especially when we speak faster, and it's easier to the first sounds become more similar, so speech can flow more naturally and quickly. But dissimulation occurs, like, imagine if the sounds are too similar to each other. So if I speak so fast that all the sounds become very similar to each other, they may become so similar to each other that you may have difficulty distinguishing each other's sounds or each other's words. Then maybe I should slow down. And is of communication are the reasons for assimilation to occur. So and there are not other things that are also important in communication, namely differences. So you want to able to primarily listeners need to be able to differentiate sounds to a minimum level so they can differentiate words and sounds from each other. Okay, so dissimulation occurs when two adjacent sounds become less similar to each other in one or more features, and I say adjacent because it includes adjacent and non-adjacent sounds. The direction assimilation may be forward progressive or backward progressive. Either it sounds a bit abstract on at the moment, so I have to give some specific examples to clarify this. In ancient Greek, we know that modern Greek comes from ancient Greek, so that means Greek has a version that existed in ancient times. Fricative in ancient Greek, in modern Greek, it became the famous stop fricative of the word for cheap in ancient Greek. It becomes tenos in modern Greek. And the logical process that constitutes dissimulation occurs when two adjacent sounds become less similar to each other in one or more features. The direction of the stimulation can be forward or backward. So if it is forward, it will be called progressive, and if it is backward, it will be called regressive. Will be called simulated regressive when you occur between two sounds that are close together or at a distance that it is not close together. Two sounds will be called simulated regressive when you occur between two sounds that are close together or at a distance that is not close together. Two sounds may be completely the same sounds, or they may be similar in some features, regardless of which they will move in the direction of becoming more different. So I'll give you another example from English of non-contiguous regressive dissimulation. So you know the word etc or etc. So you would expect it will be pronounced etc, but it is actually often said etc. Sin two alveolar, one of which becomes velar. So there is a realization here. The last thing that I can confirm the discussion about dissimulation is the fact that just like assimilation, regressive dissimulation is much more common than progressive dissimulation. That's very interesting. So do you remember that we have regressive assimilation? So we have assimilation, which is the most common phonological process, but among different types of assimilation, such as between regressive and progressive assimilation. Regressive assimilation is more common than progressive assimilation. And phonology is the study of the sound system in a language. So we also define phonology as the branch of linguistics that deals with how sounds function in relation to each other in language. The main phonological processes that exist in English and other languages, the example is of three students who are talking about the day. One student says, "Today is bumpy." The second student says, "No, it's Thursday." In response, the third student said, "I agree." So let's string what is wrong here. Actually, these students are English language learners, each having a different phonological or linguistic background from each other. In reality, what happened was the first student did not talk about the day, but he talked about the weather. He said it was windy. He didn't say when it was Wednesday, and the second student thought or misunderstood the first student, and he thought he was talking about the day. That's why he said it was Thursday, while the third student misunderstood the first student, and he said he was talking about the day. Our knowledge of how knowledge uh, of 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 how sounds are put together in an utterance, so that one of the fundamental issues in phonology is the phonological rules or processes that occur when we combine these sounds together in an utterance is the relationship between the phoneme representations or abstract sounds that we have in our minds and the phonetic representation of the pronunciation of what we say is determined by certain phonological rules. When we produce words, what we are actually doing is producing a certain sequence of morphemes, and we know that in each morpheme is combined by or produced by a sequence of sounds. So each morpheme, when added or combined by two other morphemes, will undergo certain changes. One morpheme can be compared with another morpheme because of certain sound differences that exist in each morpheme together. When morphemes are combined together to form a word, some segments within some morphemes may be juxtaposed with other morphemes or other segments within the morpheme. English phonological processes occur at two different levels: at the word level or in festival. At the word level, it occurs when one morpheme is added to another. In this case, one segment will influence another signal at the phrase level. This is caused by certain syntactic factors that we will see more examples about. English phonological processes can be divided into three main categories. We have the assimilation process, we have the syllable structure process, and we have the assimilation process. Neutralization describes change. Okay, so that's all from me. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.